introducing our topic for us on last night as we're dealing with building a healthy church. And so, of course, I would venture to say that all of us in here on tonight, we are aware of the fact that for the past almost 2.5 years now, we have been living with and we've been dealing with a global pandemic called COVID-19. And it's evident that we're all aware of it because as we look at our program and as I look at all of your faces on tonight, we're sitting here in the sanctuary of Mount Calvary Baptist Church with masks on our faces. But we thank God for the fact that as we continue to live in this pandemic with these new variants that are popping up from time to time, that we're still able to stand it better. We're able to stand it better medically, just a little bit better now than we did 2.5 years ago, because now we have vaccines and now we have boosters and we have antibodies and other treatments available to help us to recuperate faster if we do contract COVID-19. However, remember that when COVID-19 first came on the scene, that virus amplified whatever sickness or whatever illness was already present within our bodies. If you had any type of underlying conditions, if you had any type of sickness or any type of underlying conditions, especially anything that was respiratory in nature, and you contracted COVID-19, the prognosis was not good for that person. Am I right there? So COVID-19, it amplified the sickness that was already within your bodies. Next slide, please. I'm going to see where we are. He was up there. Brandon, you there? Oh. All right. No, way off. Come on back. Go to the first slide. Okay, I guess is that the first slide? All right, here we go. So therefore, just like COVID-19 revealed whatever sickness that was present within our bodies, I want to suggest to us on tonight that COVID-19 revealed just how sick our churches, the local congregations, were as well. And so I believe that we had some underlying issues that we were not aware of until COVID-19 and the health guidelines forced all of our churches to shut down for a while. And those guidelines forced all of our churches to go virtual for a minute. In other words, I'll never forget, the Sunday before our congregation shut down, the last Sunday I preached in a congregational setting. I did our morning worship, and then Pastor Gordon, my pastor, had invited me to preach his anniversary service. That Sunday in March of 2020 was the last congregational, virtual, in-person worship I had preached until we went back last July of 2022. But it was his anniversary in 2021 that I was asked to preach again. And Pastor Gordon was in the midst of his anniversary, after his anniversary, the remarks and the presentations were being made. And one of the deacons got up, and he was very concerned, and he was very sincere in what he said to Pastor. I'll never forget what Pastor said to him. The deacon got up and was apologizing to Pastor Gordon because the members weren't there like they used to be for pastor anniversaries. But my pastor said something that was so remarkable that I've been sharing with our congregation throughout the time. He said, you don't have to apologize for who's not here. You're here. COVID only revealed what was already in the hearts of those people. Somebody going to catch it in a minute. COVID only revealed what was in the heart of too many of the members of our churches. So here it is. We thought we were leading churches, and we thought we were members of churches that were thriving. We thought we were leading churches, and we were members of churches that had it going on before COVID. But now we've come to discover that there were members in our churches who really had little or no clue about the church that Jesus started. Yeah, am I right there? In other words, people were coming to church, but they did not get church. Are you with me? And so let's go to the slide, Brandon. Where did we go wrong is what we got to look at. We're talking about building a healthy church. So before COVID, where did we go wrong? Were we too busy building a business organization instead of building the body of Christ? I know I'm right there. And were we too busy making our churches look like social clubs? Were we guilty of making the church an entertainment venue? Were we guilty of making the church like a performance arts center? Were we guilty of fishing with any kind of bait? And don't you know that the way you get them is how you got to keep them? So where did the church go wrong? And so again, I say that COVID only exposed the type of members and the level of commitment and the level of dedication that was on the inside. As a matter of fact, COVID only revealed what was already there. Next slide. And the Bible teaches us, when you go to Matthew chapter 28, verses 18 through 20, it gives us the Great Commission. All of us know that as I look at your faces. I know that you're a part of your Christian education in your church. But the text reads, and Jesus came up, and he spoke to them, saying that all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. And lo, I'm with you always, even unto the end of the age. We know that that is the Great Commission. We know that is the mandate of the church. And so, of course, the command in this verse, as you've heard us say down through the years, the command in this Great Commission is not to go, but the command is make disciples. So the question we have to ask ourselves as we undergo this diagnosis, as Pastor Raven talked about, this diagnosis of the sickness that was and or is present within all of our churches that COVID exposes this. Are we making disciples or are we faking them? Are you with me? So here it is. As we move forward, we know that there is good in all things, right? We do know that our churches may have lost members because of COVID, but the good I see in this bad situation is that COVID has given us the opportunity to rebuild the church the right way, which is God's way. And so one of the resources that our Congress staff suggested for us to use on this week is a book that's entitled The Future Church. And Brother Dean, that's a pretty good title, but I want to use my literary license on tonight and use my privilege, and I want to retitle this book for our purpose. If I had written it, I would have retitled it Back to the Future, off the movie. You know, but remember that movie, the blockbuster movie? If you want to go to the future, it's called Back to the Future. You got to go back in time. So if we're going to talk about the future church, we really need to go what? Back to the future. So I believe that if there's going to be a future church, we've got to build it God's way. If we're going to build a healthy church, we got to do it God's way. Am I right there? And again, if you have any questions or comments, just feel free to interject. I'm not here to just give a monologue on tonight. So never forget that Jesus did say that upon this rock, I will build what? Let's say that again. I will build what? Too many times in our churches, we take that literally when we say this is my church. No, this is not our church. The Lord said this is what? My church. And so again I say, as bleak and as dark, as dreary as it may appear to be right now, there is still a future for the church, but we've got to go back to the future. Am I right there? Next slide, Brandon. So this is where I'm torn. And I've got to admit this, brother pastors, this is where I'm torn on tonight, and I might get some pushback from y'all on tonight, but I've got to share what's on my heart. COVID-19 forced all of our churches to go virtual. Am I right there? It forced us to do that. Some of our members never heard of Zoom until COVID-19 came on the scene. Am I right there? Brother Winston tells us from time to time in our meetings that he struggled to get on Zoom. So it forced all of us to go virtual. But I want to suggest on tonight that virtual worship in the 21st century church, it has its place. We've talked about that. Y'all gave us lessons on that. We do know that we still have to implement that some kind of way. But I want to stress that if we're going to talk about the future church, virtual worship should never become the priority of our meeting God in his house. Am I right there? Now, it forced all of us to go virtual, but we've got to make sure that as we move forward, I'm going somewhere with this, that it does not become the priority in our meeting together. In other words, this is God's way. Even with our churches reopening, we still have people for our church who have gone back to in-person worship. And for our church, we've gone back for almost 14 months now. Let me just speak about our church. We've been back in-person worship for over 14 months, and they still haven't showed up. Come on, somebody. We went back the second Sunday in July because the first Sunday was the 4th of July. So we intentionally waited to after the holiday to take away that other excuse. You know how we do. We don't show up on holiday. Even if Christmas is on Sunday, we still don't show up. So we intentionally waited until the second Sunday in July. And after 14 months now, there are still some people who still haven't shown up. So I want you to look at your church, because our church is not the only one. You know who's not coming right now. Come on, some of you. Some of you never stopped meeting in person. You just limited the number. And they still didn't show up for over 2.5 years. Am I right there? But when you go to Facebook and when you log on to Instagram, those same people who are not showing up, they're still going on vacations. They still going to nice and fancy restaurants for brunch and dinner. You see them in the shopping malls. They still going to work. They still going to school. They still traveling on airplanes, boats, and automobiles. In other words, I'm just trying to say that people do what they want to do, and they're making in-person worship an option, and online worship has now become their priority. And let me tell you the progression of that as well. When you start off on live streaming, when we tried that, you try live streaming, and sometimes live streaming gets choppy. They'll join for live stream when you first went to Zoom, when you first went to Facebook. All of a sudden, they stopped doing that, and they say, well, Pastor, I caught the recording afterwards. Hello, somebody. And then later on, they say, well, I didn't catch the recording Sunday, but I caught the recording on Wednesday night. And then after that, they just stopped looking at the recording all together. Are you with me? So people do what they want to do. Now, I have not bought into that theme yet of how we have to, how online worship should become the priority focus for the 21st century church. I still think it needs to be available for those members who have a genuine reason to not be there. But online worship should not be the priority of our meeting together. Am I right there? I opened up a can of worms. I better put it on pause for a minute. Any questions or comments from you all? Anything I need to clear up? Okay. So I have not bought into the idea. I still believe that in-person worship is the way that God prefers. I'm going somewhere. Next slide. And the reason I hold on to this, I love this passage. I've always taught on it. But because of this pandemic, this passage of Scripture has become of a priority for me. And I'm speaking of Hebrews chapter 10, verses 23 through 25. And there the text reads, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider, I want you to underscore that word consider, how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds. Here it is, not forsaking our own assembling together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. And so when I look at this verse, Brother Moderator, I've always loved this verse, but its importance has become of more potent and more powerful because of the times that we are currently living in. This verse reminds me that there are some things you just can't get in a virtual worship experience. Am I right there? And that's why you need to make your way to the church. Come on, somebody. In other words, you got to make your way to the building where the church meets. Let me clear that up a little bit, because
wherever you meet, that's not the church. But when the church gets there, the church is meeting in the building. Am I with you? Okay. And let me put it this way. In-person worship can do for you what you can't get online. All right? How many of you got fireplaces? Y'all might have those gas fireplaces, but how many of you got a wood-burning fireplace? When we had our house built, I was going to say we intentionally, but we couldn't get gas to our property line. But even if we could get gas, we'd already talked about it. We wanted a wood-burning fireplace. And that's because I like the smell of wood. Somebody catching it in a minute. But there's something about wood. When you have a wood-burning fireplace and you put the logs on that fire, put a little starter block on there, and something happens as the logs start burning, they start making coals. Y'all know what I'm talking about? And as long as the coals stay together, I don't care how low the fire gets, you can pull out the poker and stir up those coals, and all of a sudden the fire starts rekindling. Come on, y'all feel this with me. And the coals start rekindling because the coals that came from that burning log, they all what? Stay together. But sometimes, as the log burns, a coal falls off the side all by itself. It's isolated from the pile of coals. Are you with me? Now, that isolated coal, it keeps its reddish glow for a while. It keeps burning for a while. It gives a little heat for a while, a little warmth for a while. But after a while, it ashes over. Am I right there? The reddish glow goes away. The fire burns out. The heat goes out. All because it was alone on the side, far away from that pile of burning coals. Come on, somebody. And don't you know that that's what happens on online worship? If that's all you're getting, you're just a coal on the side all by yourself. Come on, somebody. There's some things that you just can't get online that in worship experience will give you. All right? Go to this next slide. Now, here it is. They show up for church on Sundays. At least when we were going, when everybody was virtual, at least when we first started out, at least everybody dressed up. They would tell you, sometimes I even put my robe on in my office on Zoom sharing communion. Hello, somebody. But all of a sudden, people start showing up with hair curlers on their head, bathrobes on, didn't even wash their face and brush their teeth. That's why they never turned their cameras on. I know what I'm talking about. Hello, somebody. I ain't gonna go that route. It wasn't a worship experience, but I was on another Zoom call one time, and y'all gotta watch your cameras on there sometimes. And all of a sudden, this woman started. She was how do you say this? She started scratching in places with her camera on. And all of a sudden, somebody said, Brother Mike, tell so-and-so to turn her camera off. We seeing everything that she's doing. You with me? Let me leave that alone. I just hit me for a minute. But anyway, so people show up for online worship. Y'all know how y'all did. Come on. How many of y'all want to admit that when your church was virtual, you didn't always dress up for Sunday morning worship? All right. Come on, let's get back to this. All right. So let me get back to this text. So the unknown Hebrew writer, this verse teaches us why we ought to gather with the saints. We ought to gather at the place of worship. This unknown Hebrew writer uses a strange word that shows us, the believers, our responsibility one to another. We have a duty to stir up one another to live, to love, and to do good works. And that word consider means that we've got to give attention to one another. Now, this goes back to our conversation from last night when Pastor Marable entered this class. We want to know why the millennials are not coming. We want to know why generations X and Y are not coming. We want to know why some of the baby boomers are not coming. I forget what my generation is called. I'm after the baby boomers and before the millennials. You want to know why some of our generation are not coming. It's because we're not considering one another. All right? This word consider means that we got to give attention to one another. We've got to fix our attention upon one another. We have to give continuous care to one another. Another definition from this Greek word means we've got to watch over one another. How different the church would be, how much stronger the church would be if we had followed this command before COVID-19 came. And so let's be honest, the real reason we want to know why we're catering to them, we're trying to get them back, is because we lost them. When they were there, we weren't considering them as we should. Come on, somebody. The reason they're missing, the reason some baby boomers are missing, so the reason some people in your generation is missing is because we did not do what Hebrews 10:23 through 25 taught the church to do. We did not consider one another. All right? Now, here it is. Some Christians have a funny way of loving one another. Now, the Hebrew writer just said that when you gather with the saints, when you assemble with the saints, thank you, Holy Ghost, this word assemble or gathering is used, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together, is used 2 times in the New Testament. It's used once here in Hebrews 10, and it's also is used in Thessalonica, the writings, Thessalonians writings. And the reason it's used there is when the saints of God are gathered up together and meet him in the air. That's what it means there. But here it means when the saints assemble together in the synagogue, in the local assembly, in the local congregation. And so we're called to stir one another in love, but we got a funny way of loving other saints. We love people, we say, by ignoring them. We love people by excluding people. We love by rolling our eyes at people. We love by talking about people. We love by tearing people down instead of building them up. We love by displaying and showing nasty attitudes towards people. We love by discouraging people rather than lifting them up. We love by speaking death into the life of people rather than speaking in life. But baby, let me tell you something. That's a funny way of loving. Hello, somebody. That's not God's way of loving. That's the way we love in the church, but that's not God's way of loving. That's not agape. Agape is an unconditional love. Agape is an unmerited, undeserving type of love style. Agape is an in spite of love style. I still what? Love you. Which leads me, next slide, which leads me to the major focus of my assignment on tonight, and that is to talk about the law of love. If the church is going to rebuild into being a healthy church, we have to genuinely love everybody. Let the church say everybody. And that means that nobody is excluded. Am I right there? Any questions or comments on anything we've talked about so far before I move on? Yes, sir. The young folks are multitasking. Oh, phones and iPads in church? Yeah, that gets, yeah. When we get back for in-person worship, or since we are in in-person worship, well, there comes a place where some discipline needs to take place. But the truth be told, I mean, some of us, I'm guilty of that from time to time too. I'll just be honest with you, because y'all probably have seen some of us as pastors on our phones when we shouldn't be on our phones either. And we're not always reading the Bible. Come on, I'm just being honest, you know. So, it starts with us too, you know. And so, but technology, just like I said, online worship has crippled us. Technology has crippled us too. Some of y'all in here might be on your phones right now in the midst of this teaching session, you know. And so we've got to be, I can fast forward where I'm going with this. I'm going to deal with something in a minute that deals with everybody can't discipline everyone in church, because we don't know how to discipline with the right motives, first of all, and we don't know how to discipline in the right language.
I think I can share this without going into too much details. I'm in the process right now where I licensed a young man in, was it January? And I'm already doing some discipline issues right now because the boy is hard-headed and he just don't want to listen. You with me? And I'm making sure that I'm disciplined and rebuking in the spirit of love with the purpose of trying to correct him and the purpose of trying to win him without going into too much details. The deacons called me one Sunday because I noticed something, well, a whole lot of issues going on with them, but a whole lot. It's just, you know, some of our children just give us hard heads. They just give us headaches. Yeah, y'all know what I'm talking about. So his second time preaching, he made a statement to me right before worship. I'll be pastor for the day. I said, no, you won't be pastor for the day. I say, all you're going to do is get up and preach when it's time for you to preach. Ain't no pastor for the day, you know. And then some other issues are going on. But lately, he started wearing shorts on Sunday morning. So I ain't saying anything. I did give him an assignment. That went on 1 week. It went on another week. The deacon started saying, well, Pastor, you want to know something? I said, no. We've talked about expectations of dress codes. If he's going to show up in shorts, he want to dress like a little boy, I'm going to treat him like a little boy. Hello, somebody, you know. That's just a part of tough love, you know. Trying to make him a better preacher. And so that's just one illustration that even when it comes time to church discipline, you got to do it with the right spirit, with the right purpose, and with the right tone. There's a passage in Ephesians I'm going to get to later on. It's in Ephesians chapter 4, I think it's the 15th verse, when I make this transition, that Paul uses a strange language there about speaking the truth in love. Sometimes we got a problem in church. You might be speaking the truth, but you're not doing it in love. You're speaking the truth for your own sneaky agenda. Hello, somebody. Just like for those of you who've been through the ordination process, there's a question when we used to do ordinations, because now sometimes the people say, just sign this paper. I had to deal with that little headache recently, too. Just signing no paper. But when you used to do ordinations, an ordination question used to be about on church discipline. How do you do church discipline? And the way you do church discipline, if somebody is wrong and you know it, you go to that person. If y'all get it resolved, it stops right there. You don't tell anybody else. If they don't hear you, you take somebody else with you. And if it's resolved, it stays between the three of you all. And if they don't hear the three of you all, you can go on with 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever that number might be. But finally, when it comes before the body, and they still don't want to change their ways, then you dismiss them then because they don't want to be won. The purpose of church discipline is not to kick somebody out. The purpose of church discipline is to make them a better saint. But some of us want to discipline because we want to get rid of somebody. Hello, somebody. Are you with me? So that's how you deal with it. So you correct that person with the right spirit. All right? With the right spirit. But everybody can't do discipline. Brother Winston. All right? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Right, right. Yes, ma'am. That's true. Yeah, that is true. Yeah. Some, it was address. We're gonna leave it like that. Okay, we'll leave it like that. Okay. Right. Now we're talking about rebuilding our church. Well, we use the title "Building a Healthy Church," but I'm rebranding that just a little and say "Rebuilding a Healthy Church" because we're coming out of post COVID, still dealing with it, but coming out the post COVID, trying to get things back in order. Now, here's the thing about it: these issues that we're talking about, and I'm going to touch on something in a minute. When you start dealing with certain issues, like the dress issues, the hat issues, the iPhone issues, you got to make sure everybody in your church can address those issues. That's how we lose people. The wrong people get to them too quick, too fast. There are some things that you just don't have to address. You with me? I almost want to state that there ought to be a special type of group. I know we got too many groups already, but there's got to be a special type of group with people with the right temperament, who's got the right tone, who's got the right spirit to address some of these issues. We lose people because we don't know how to talk to people. Hello, somebody. All right. Now you're talking about rebuilding. If we rebuild the old way, if we rebuild the wrong way, I gave several examples of that. Let me just make this clear. I wanted to leave that alone because for the sake of time, we treat our churches today too much like a business organization. The church is not an organization. The church is a living organism. Now, we may have organized to operate in the secular world, but never forget that it is an organism. There is no organization without the organism. My wife will tell you this. I had to deal with this about 3 weeks ago. I got a phone call, so I had to make sure that this person who called me had clearance from a pastor. There's a church that's well established in age. They got a lot of buildings, got a lot of members, but they don't have a constitution and bylaws. And so they're in the process of developing the constitution and bylaws, and this lady who called me, she's an attorney, and she's a faithful member of their church. And so they're having some tension between the roles of the trustees and the role of the deacons. And the pastor wanted some clearance because they wasn't hearing what the pastor had to say. So he had the attorney to call me, who's a member, who's helping them throughout this tension. And she wanted to know what the scripture had to say about who runs the church. I said, in the Baptist church, neither the trustees nor the deacons run the church. In the Baptist church, it's the body who runs the church. Hello, somebody. We fight over stuff that has been settled in the Bible a long time ago. Are you with me? And so the issue is this, and Brother President, we had talked about this once before, about
there's a shift, there's a paradigm shift, and the Lord's just leading me here. I'm going to get back to this and close some of this out. But there's a paradigm shift that's taking place in how we organize. Y'all know that we used to have trustees. Our churches were set up as trusteeships. But now we've shifted for the protection of the leadership of the team, of the church, the finance people, the pastor, and then, believe it or not, every member. We have moved to organizing the church or setting the church up as a not-for-profit corporation for our protection. And the reason is, if something was to ever happen in your church, somebody fall, they could sue the pastor personally, they could sue every trustee personally, and then if they get a hold of your membership roll, they could sue every member personally. And so that's one reason why we incorporated. But what we messed up is that we failed to teach that whoever sits on the board of directors of the organization of your church, if you're organized as a not-for-profit corporation, you don't make decisions for the body. Hello, somebody. You are still a steward over what the body instructs you to do. We've got too many people who are allowing 3, 5, 7, however many people may sit on the board of your directors, making decisions for 50, 150, 200, 500, or 700 people. That is not biblical. And I'm way off now, but it's just on me right there. Don't let 3 or 5 or 7 people steal your voice in your church. Not in a Baptist church. Hello, somebody? I know, Brother President, I'm off. Okay. Let me say it one more time for the people in the back. For the people in the back, in a Baptist church, we don't have presbyteries. In the Baptist church, we don't have boards of elders. In the Baptist church, the authority is in the congregation. Hello? In the Baptist church, the voice, the decision is in the congregation. Not in the 3 people who sits on the board of directors, or the 5 people, or the 7 people who sit on the board. We all know Joel Osteen down in Houston, Texas, right? As many people as they got in that church, you know how many people sit on the board of directors? Just him and his mama, and I think maybe his wife. That is it. Out of 50,000 people, you got 3 people sitting on the board of directors making decisions for that church. Hello, somebody? We believe one of our polity, one of our practices, one of our disciplines as Baptists is that we are congregational. All right? Okay, so we were thinking about that as a topic later on, but let me go ahead. Yeah. Wait a minute, say that one more time, Brother President. Yes, sir. I want to make sure I heard you right. Okay, that's what I'm dealing with. Now, when you mean the body, you mean when the body gathers together, or members within the body who are spiritual? Okay. Right. And I'm glad Pastor is saying that along with me, because in Galatians, Paul deals with that. He said everybody can go to a brother or a sister who's got issues, who are fallen. He said, you who are spiritual, you do the restoration. Now, here's the thing about it. And sometimes I teach this lesson on there are 2 types of Christians we have in our churches, because I'm not questioning anybody's salvation. But Paul makes it clear in the book of Corinth, and I think I've heard Pastor Brooks preach a sermon on this once before. We've got spiritual Christians, and then we got some worldly thinking Christians in our churches. All right? They might be saved, but they're worldly thinking. Are you with me? And too many times, we don't allow an opportunity for the spiritual saint to get to someone who may have stumbled or fallen. It's always for some reason that worldly thinking brother or sister who gets there first. And if that worldly thinking brother or sister gets there first, more than likely, you're going to lose that person within your church. All right? Let me move on real quick, because I'm not going to be able to deal with all of this. Yes, sir. No. No. That's not true. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. From the congregation, right. I'm telling you what it is. Quick lesson on stewardship, trusteeship. It was okay with trustees, but now we got to teach the same principle if you're organized as a corporation. The principles of stewardship is this. There's an owner, there's a steward or a trustee. There is something that is being managed. Whoever is managing what the owner owns, they're responsible. They've got to give an account to it, right? But they are managing what belongs to someone else. That's all a trustee in your church is doing. A trustee or anyone who sits on the board of director of the organization of your church is only managing what the church owns. Your property, your bank accounts. They can't do what they just want to do without you giving them authorization. I really might be meddling now because every church is different, but I'm just dealing with Baptist polity and practices. Hello, somebody? If you say you want a red van and the trustees say, no, we're going to get a blue van, they got to go get a red van. Hello? Because there you go. Now, let them tell you they're a board of director of the organization. You can speak up and tell them there is no organization without the organism. All right? Now, I'm way off point now, but let's get back to this since I got 2 minutes left. Next slide. Let me see where I am. Okay, next slide. I got 3? Okay, next slide. Brandon, where are we? Okay, good. The law of love. Let me go here. The law of love. This is some funny math we're going to talk about now. Now, here it is. I was doing a workshop not too long ago. If you want to take it off, that's fine. I know where I am now. I did a workshop a long time ago on evangelism and church growth, and I was invited out of town, and I spent the opening of that workshop asking everyone who was present what their expectations were for that workshop on evangelism and church growth. And somebody said to me they wanted to know how to get more butts in the seats because butts in the seats pay the bills. The author said that just because there are butts in the seats, just because there are dollars in the bank, just because a church has 2 or 3 campuses does not mean that church growth is happening. Can I say that again? Let me back that train up. I was out of town doing a workshop on evangelism and church growth. I asked everybody, what were your expectations for these 2 or 3 days? It may have been 3 days. And someone said, and some of y'all know who it is, I ain't going to call his name. He said, I want to know, in this jokingly way, I want to know how to get more butts in the seats because butts in the seats pays the bills. Hello. Real church growth is validated by unity and not members. Hello, somebody. Now, too many of us are too quick to measure the inputs of worship attendance and the weekly financial report to determine the successes of our churches. And I've got to admit, it's good to see the fruits of your labor. It's good to see people in the public worship setting. It's good to see that the account grew from week to week. But spiritual growth takes a long time. And spiritual growth is not easily as measured as seeing butts in the seat and bucks in the bank. Are you with me? So number one, numbers on the other hand are black and white, but spiritual growth is hard to see. And of course, we see that the Bible talks about numbers. Luke talks about numbers. At the ascension of Christ, there were 120 disciples waiting for him. In the upper room at the prayer meeting, there were 120 disciples. On the day of Pentecost, there were 120 disciples. There were 120 disciples who heard Peter preach the first Christian sermon. And then the Bible says, in one day, 3,000 souls were added. So in one day, the church went from 120 to 3,120 disciples. Numbers are good. It helps us to see the fruit of our labors, but numbers alone does not mean that spiritual growth is occurring. And so the point I'm trying to make is this. We have made attendance, we've made numbers into the proof of disciple making, even though we may not be making any disciples at all. Hello, somebody. So the math of real church growth is this. It's not 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 7. But the real growth of church math is this. 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 1. Are you with me? Not in how many members you have, but are you unified? Come on, somebody. In other words, I want you, in your spare time, I want you to look at the longest prayer that Jesus gives in the Bible. That's in John 17. And in that text, Jesus talks about the oneness that he had with the Father, how he shared the Father's glory and the Father shared his glory. He talks about the oneness of him and the Father. And then he talks about the oneness that we as believers or disciples have with one another as well as with him. And here it is. Don't miss this. When it comes to church growth, the church's number one asset is our unity. Not how many members we have on the roll, but whether or not are we unified. And if we're unified, then we're able to stand it a little bit better. Never forget, Pastor Gordon, of course, is my pastor now, but Pastor Gordon, Pastor Goodwin used to tell this story I heard for many years. I was growing up in Washington Grove. And I'm going to close on this, Brother Moderator. I know we're getting close on time. Pastor Goodwin used to tell the story because he was a good old Georgia boy. And some of y'all know this story. And so he was exposed to all of those, taking those chickens to fight, those roosters to fight, using the word in this language, those cockfights that was taking place. And so one day he tells a story of how this man had come back from fighting his roosters, and they put them up. They were in their separate cages. If you ever watch cockfighting, go back and watch Chicken George on Roots. You get an idea what I'm talking about on cockfighting. And so he went to the barn, put the roosters up in their individual cages, and he shut the barn. But what he did not do, he did not lock the individual gates on the cages. The next morning, he went to the barn, and all of his fighting roosters were dead. He looked at those roosters laying on the ground, and he said, "Fools, don't you know you were all on the same team?" They killed each other, but they were all on the same team. And we are killing people in the church and don't realize we're on the same team. So what is unity? And here's the hard truth of the matter. It's easier to count butts in the seats than it is to weigh or measure the spirit of our love in our churches. Are you with me? So I want to do this quickly. Brandon, put up the slide about how to I can't deal with all of this, what I really want to do. Go to the slide that deals with how do you evaluate the unity in your church. Let's go there. So as you attempt to evaluate or try to validate our efforts in ministry, and what I wanted to deal with is that there's this bridge comes between knowing what to do and then putting it into practice. And there's a bridge there. We might have the doctrine right. Some churches might have the deeds right. Some churches got the creed right and no deeds. Some got the deeds right and no creed. But true unity is learning how to be a church that's got its doctrine right as well as its actions right. And that's where the law of love comes in. So as you attempt to evaluate or try to validate your efforts in ministry, ask these questions about the unity of your church. Does my church excel at both right thinking and right acting. In other words, you might know the right things. You're thinking right, but are your actions matching up to what you know to be true? Are you with me? That's just like the person who may tell you the right thing, but the way they're portraying it or giving it over their deed is not right. Are you with me? So does my church excel at both right thinking and right acting? Do we humbly, gently, patiently, lovingly, peaceably make every effort to the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace? Are we doing our best to protect the spirit of unity within the church? Do we regularly open up with each other, even on issues that make us uncomfortable because we may disagree? And never forget that part of the Baptist covenant. Don't get mad when the vote doesn't go your way. The covenant says we will cheerfully recognize the right of the majority to what? Govern. And what's the key word there? Cheerfully. That's the key word there is what? Cheerfully. All right? And so I'm through and I say this. So there's a dilemma when it comes to love and unity. There's a dilemma that growing churches will face as we rebuild from this pandemic. And this dilemma is something our churches have got to do a better job of as we become a post-pandemic church. Here it is, next slide. For growth to be validated by unity and love, people have to know each other deeply. When people start coming back to the church, as you win more people to the body of Christ, and as they unite with your church family, you've got to get to know one another. But the larger your church gets, the harder it is to know others and to be known by them. Are you with me? In other words, you've got to be aware of the fact that quantity can be an enemy of the intimacy of your church. The larger you get, the harder you got to work at protecting the love and the unity of the church. And so Tina Turner, I'm through when I say this. Y'all know where I'm going. She recorded a song that was entitled, What's Love Got to Do with It? Y'all know that song, don't you? Now, she did not write this song, but I believe this song was written for her to record because of her personal experience with Ike Turner. Come on, somebody. Y'all know how that relationship was. Tina Turner was in an abusive relationship. Brother Dean said it was a toxic relationship. She was verbally abused, emotionally abused, and even physically abused. We all saw the scene. Eat the cake, Adam May. Come on, somebody. In the midst of this song, though, there's a line that stands out quite clearly. She said, who needs a heart when a heart can be broken? Now, if we would be honest with ourselves, we've got some heartless people in our churches because their hearts have been broken. But if we're going to build a healthy church for the future, love has everything to do with it. Jesus said, love ye one another as I have loved you. Am I talking right? Jesus said, by this all men will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. Am I right? And John said, and we know that we have passed from death to life. He said, we know that we're saved because we have love for the brethren. So this last slide, if you were given the choice between more people in your church or unity in your church by next Sunday, which one would you choose? God bless you. I'm through on the night.